The desert sun blazed mercilessly over the small Afghan village, casting long shadows between the mud brick houses. Dust swirled in the hot wind, carrying the scent of cooking fires and something else, something that made Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez's stomach clench with unease. He adjusted his gear and squinted through his sunglasses, watching the narrow streets ahead. "Something's not right here," whispered Petty Officer Jake Morrison, crouched beside him behind a crumbling wall. The Navy SEAL team had been conducting routine patrols in this area for weeks, but today felt different. The usual sounds of village life, children playing, vendors calling out their wares, the rhythmic pounding of grain, were conspicuously absent. Rodriguez nodded, his weathered face grim. At 34, he'd seen enough combat in Iraq and Afghanistan to trust his instincts. Too quiet. Where is everyone? Their team medic, hospital corpsman second class Sarah Chun, adjusted her medical pack and checked her sidearm. At 28, she was smaller than most of her teammates, but had earned their respect through countless missions. Her steady hands and quick thinking had saved more lives than she could count. "Maybe they're just staying indoors because of the heat," she suggested, though her voice carried doubt. Team leader Lieutenant Commander David Bear Thompson raised his hand for silence. The massive man, built like the linebacker he'd been in college, had led this team through dozens of successful operations. His ice blue eyes scanned the rooftops methodically. "Chin's right to be cautious, but Rodriguez's gut is usually spot on. We proceed with extreme caution. Standard patrol formation, but stay alert." The team moved forward through the dusty streets, their boots making soft, crunching sounds on the packed earth. Each SEAL was a study in controlled tension, ready to react instantly to any threat. They'd been together for 18 months, long enough to develop the kind of wordless communication that kept them alive in hostile territory. As they rounded a corner near the village center, the silence was broken by a sound that made them all freeze. A woman's voice, singing softly in Pashto. The melody was haunting, almost mournful, drifting from an open window in a house ahead. "Just a woman singing," Morrison whispered, but his finger rested near his rifle's trigger guard. Thompson held up a closed fist, signaling the team to halt. Something about the scene felt like a setup. In his experience, when things seemed too normal in an abnormal situation, it usually meant trouble. He studied the building carefully, noting the traditional Afghan architecture, the carved wooden shutters, the small garden where vegetables grew in neat rows despite the harsh climate. Shin found herself listening to the woman's voice, surprised by its beauty. Growing up in San Francisco's Chinatown, she developed an appreciation for different cultures and languages. The Pashto words were unintelligible to her, but the emotion behind them was universal. It spoke of loss, of waiting, of hope that seemed fragile as spun glass. "Contact ahead," came a voice through their radio. It was Petty Officer Carlos Mendez, their sniper, positioned on a rooftop 2 blocks away. "Single male, armed, moving toward your position from the east. Looks agitated." The team immediately took defensive positions, using doorways and low walls for cover. The singing stopped abruptly, as if the woman had sensed the sudden change in atmosphere. Thompson felt his heart rate increase slightly, not from fear but from the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with potential combat. A man appeared at the far end of the street, walking quickly toward them. He was middle-aged, wearing traditional Afghan dress, with a Kalashnikov rifle slung across his shoulder. His face was flushed with exertion and what appeared to be panic. "American soldiers," he called out in accented English, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "Please, you must help. There has been an attack." Thompson made a quick decision. "Chun, Morrison with me." Rodriguez maintained overwatch. He stepped partially from cover, weapon ready but not directly threatening. "Stop there, friend. Tell us what happened." The Afghan man, Chun guessed he was in his 50s, with graying hair and worry lines etched deep around his eyes, stopped about 20 feet away. His chest rose and fell rapidly from exertion. "Taliban fighters, they came last night. Took many people. Killed others. My daughter." His voice broke slightly. She's hurt very badly. Where? Thompson asked, his tactical mind already processing options and potential risks. This could be a trap, designed to lure them into a building where explosives waited, or it could be genuine. The man's distress seemed real, but in this part of the world, appearances could be deceiving. My house, just there. The man pointed to the building from which they'd heard the singing. She needs doctor, but the Taliban, they said they will come back. They said anyone who helps Americans will die. Chun stepped forward slightly, her medical training overriding tactical caution. What kind of injuries? Gunshot. In the chest. She bleeds much, but still breathes. The man's eyes filled with tears. I am Khalil Ahmad. She's my only child. Her mother died when she was small. Please, I know you have medicine, real doctors with your soldiers. Thompson weighed his options quickly. Their mission parameters allowed for humanitarian assistance, but they couldn't risk the entire team for one casualty. On the other hand, helping local civilians often provided valuable intelligence and improved relations with the community. Rodriguez, what's your assessment? He asked quietly into his throat mic. Building looks clean from here. No obvious threats. But this whole situation still feels off to me, LT. Chun looked at Thompson with pleading eyes. Sir, if she's really wounded, time is critical. Chest wounds can deteriorate rapidly. I know, Chun. Thompson had been in command long enough to know that every decision carried weight. Save one life, and potentially risk 6, or play it safe, and let an innocent die. These were the impossible choices that kept him awake at night. Morrison, ever the pragmatist, voiced what they were all thinking. Could be a setup, Bear? How do we know this guy's not leading us into an ambush? Khalil seemed to understand their hesitation. I know you do not trust. In war, trust is dangerous. But my daughter, she is innocent. She has never held weapon, never spoke against anyone. She teaches children to read. She gives food to hungry people. He reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. This is Amira. Look at her face. Look, and tell me if you see terrorist. Shin took the photograph carefully. It showed a young woman, probably early 20s, with intelligent dark eyes and a gentle smile. She was sitting with a group of children, holding a book. The children were gathered around her, faces bright with attention. It was clearly a teaching moment captured in time. She's beautiful, Chin said softly, handing the photo to Thompson. Thompson studied the image for a long moment. He'd seen too many photos like this. Innocent faces that became casualties of a war they never chose to be part of. But he'd also learned to be cautious about emotional manipulation. Still, something about the man's desperation felt genuine. Mendez, any other movement in the area? He asked through his radio. Negative. Village is still like a ghost town. This guy seems to be the only one moving around out here. Thompson made his decision. We'll take a look, but we do this tactically. Chun, you're with me and the father. Morrison, Rodriguez, you set up security outside. If this goes bad, you extract immediately and call for backup. Copy that, Rodriguez replied, though Chan could hear the reluctance in his voice. As they approached Khalil's house, Chan noticed details she'd missed from a distance. The wooden door was splintered near the handle, as if someone had kicked it in. Bullet holes dotted the mud brick wall, fresh enough that dust still clung to the edges. This wasn't staging. This was real damage from recent violence. They came in the night, Khalil explained as he led them to his front door. 6 men, maybe 7. They accused us of helping Americans because I sell goods to your soldiers sometimes. They said this makes me traitor. He paused at the threshold, his hand trembling slightly on the damaged door. Amira tried to reason with them. She speaks good English, better than me. She thought maybe she could explain that we were just trying to survive. Chen's medical instincts were fully engaged now. How long ago was she shot? Maybe 4 hours? At dawn. Khalil's voice carried the weight of a father's helplessness. The bleeding, it stopped some, but she is very weak. Sometimes she talks strange, like she is somewhere else. For hours with a chest wound in this environment could mean infection, internal bleeding, or worse. Chun mentally reviewed her medical supplies. She carried enough to stabilize most injuries, but if there was significant internal damage, they'd need to get the patient to a proper medical facility quickly. Thompson entered first, weapon ready, scanning the interior of the traditional Afghan home. The main room was simply furnished with colorful rugs and low cushions. Everything seemed normal except for the dark stains on one of the rugs. Blood that someone had tried unsuccessfully to clean. "She is in there," Khalil said, pointing to a doorway hung with a heavy curtain. "I tried to make her comfortable, but I do not know medicine." Chun pushed through the curtain and immediately assessed the situation. A young woman lay on a simple bed, her breathing shallow and rapid. Her face was pale, but peaceful, eyes closed. Someone had tried to bandage her chest wound, but blood had seeped through the makeshift dressing. "Amira," Chun said softly, kneeling beside the bed. The woman's eyes fluttered open. They were the same intelligent, dark eyes from the photograph, but now clouded with pain and medication. "American," Amira whispered in accented English. "Father said soldiers would come. I'm a medic. I'm here to help you." Chun quickly examined the bandage. The entry wound was high on the left side of the chest, potentially missing major organs, but definitely requiring immediate attention. "Can you tell me where it hurts most?" "Everywhere," Amira said with a weak smile. "But mostly here." She moved her hand slightly toward her chest. Chun began setting up her medical equipment. "I need to examine the wound properly. It might hurt a little." As she carefully removed the blood-stained bandage, Chun noticed something that made her pause. The wound itself was clean, too clean for a typical AK-47 round fired at close range. The edges were precise, almost surgical. But more puzzling was what she found when she lifted Amira's arm to check for exit wounds. There, hidden beneath her traditional clothing, was a tattoo that made Chun's blood run cold. It was small, discreet, but unmistakable to someone with military training. The Special Operations Forces insignia, modified with symbols Chun didn't immediately recognize, but that screamed military to her trained eye. Chun's mind raced. The woman lying before her wasn't just an innocent civilian caught in crossfire. But if she was military, why was she here? Why hadn't she identified herself? And what kind of operation would put a female soldier alone in a Taliban-controlled village? "Thompson," Chun called quietly, not wanting to alarm Khalil. "I need you in here." Thompson appeared immediately, taking in the scene with experienced eyes. Chun caught his attention and subtly indicated the tattoo. She watched his expression change from concern to sharp alertness. "What is it?" he asked, moving closer to examine what Chun had found. "I'm not sure yet, but this isn't what it appears to be." Chun kept her voice low. "The wound patterns are wrong for the story we've been told," and she glanced meaningfully at Amira's arm. Amira's eyes had been following their conversation, and now she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You saw it." "Saw what?" Thompson asked, though his tactical instincts were already providing answers he didn't like. "My tattoo." Amira closed her eyes briefly, as if making a difficult decision. "I am not who my father thinks I am." Khalil, who had been standing anxiously in the doorway, stepped forward. "What do you mean?" "Amira, what are you saying?" The young woman looked at her father with eyes full of pain that had nothing to do with her physical wound. "Baba, I love you, but I have not told you truth about what I do when I go to the city." Chun continued working on the wound while listening to this revelation. Her medical assessment confirmed what she'd suspected. This was not a wound from random Taliban violence. The trajectory was all wrong, and there were powder burns suggesting the gun had been fired at extremely close range. "I am soldier," Amira continued, her voice growing stronger despite her obvious pain. "American soldier. Special Forces. My real name is Lieutenant Amira Khalil, United States Army." The silence that followed was deafening. Khalil staggered backward, as if he'd been physically struck. Thompson's hand instinctively moved toward his weapon, though he wasn't sure yet whether this woman represented a threat or an ally. "That's impossible," Khalil whispered. "You are my daughter. You were born here. You have never left this valley." Amira's eyes filled with tears. "I'm your daughter, Baba, but I'm also other things." She looked directly at Thompson. "Lieutenant, I need to speak with your commanding officer. My cover has been compromised, and there are things you need to know about Taliban operations in this area." Chun finished applying a proper field dressing to the wound. She needs to get to a medical facility soon, but she's stable for now. The bullet didn't hit anything vital. Thompson was processing rapidly. A female Special Forces soldier operating under deep cover in Taliban territory. It was the kind of operation that existed in the gray areas between official military action and intelligence gathering. But why had her cover been blown? And why was she wounded? "How do we know you're really American military?" Thompson asked. "Anyone could get a tattoo." Amira reached slowly beneath her pillow and withdrew something that made Thompson's eyes widen. It was a CAC card, a common access card used by U.S. military personnel. But more than that, it was a special operations CAC with additional security features that would be nearly impossible to fake. Lieutenant Amira Khalil, 75th Ranger Regiment, Special Assignment to Task Force White, she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of a trained officer despite her weakened condition. Authentication code Bravo 77 Charlie. Thompson felt his world shift slightly. If this woman was legitimate military, it changed everything about their situation. "What's your mission here?" "Intelligence gathering on Taliban supply routes and leadership structure. I've been here for 8 months, living as a teacher while documenting enemy movements and safe houses." Amira paused to catch her breath. "Yesterday, I discovered something that changes everything. The Taliban aren't just planning raids anymore. They're planning something much bigger." Chun looked up from her medical work. "Who shot you? And why?" "One of my contacts. A man I thought I could trust." Amira's voice carried bitter disappointment. "I've been feeding information to local resistance leaders, trying to build a network. But someone betrayed me. They knew I was American before they came here last night." Khalil slowly sank to his knees beside the bed. "My daughter, my little Amira. All these months, you have been living a lie." "Not a lie, Baba. I am still your daughter. I am still the woman who teaches children and helps feed the hungry. But I'm also a soldier fighting to protect people like you from men who would destroy everything good in this world." Thompson's radio crackled to life. Contact approaching from multiple directions, came Mendez's urgent voice. "At least 12 hostiles, armed, moving fast toward your position. The conversation would have to wait." Thompson looked at Chun. "Could she be moved?" "Not recommended, but if we have to, we have to." Thompson made the call. "Rodriguez, Morrison, prepare for defensive positions. We've got a wounded American soldier here, and we're not leaving her behind." As if to punctuate his words, the sound of AK-47 fire erupted from somewhere nearby, followed immediately by the crack of Mendez's sniper rifle responding. The battle for this small Afghan village was about to begin, with a wounded soldier who had been living a double life at the center of all. Chin quickly gathered her medical supplies while Thompson helped Amira sit up. "Can you walk at all?" "I can try," Amira said through gritted teeth. She looked at her father, who was still kneeling in shock. "Baba, you must come with us. If they find you helped me, they will kill you." Khalil looked at his daughter, this stranger who wore his daughter's face but carried secrets that could reshape his understanding of everything. "I do not understand any of this." "You don't have to understand it right now," Thompson said firmly. "But we need to move. All of us. Now." Outside, the sounds of gunfire were getting closer. Chin could hear Rodriguez shouting tactical instructions to Morrison, and the distinctive sound of insurgent weapons firing from multiple positions. They were surrounded, with a wounded soldier who wasn't who she appeared to be, and a civilian who had just learned his daughter was living a lie. As Thompson helped Amira to her feet, she grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Lieutenant, there's something else. The Taliban operation I discovered, it's happening today, in less than 6 hours. If we don't get word at command, a lot of American soldiers are going to die." The weight of that information settled over the room like a blanket. They weren't just fighting for their own survival now. They were potentially the only thing standing between the Taliban and a major victory that could change the course of the war in this region. Chun supported Amira's other side, feeling the young woman's weight against her. What kind of operation? Coordinated attack on 3 forward bases simultaneously. They have inside information about patrol schedules and defensive positions. Someone high up in the command structure has been feeding them intelligence for weeks. Thompson felt his stomach drop. This wasn't just about rescuing a wounded soldier anymore. This was about preventing a potential massacre. And they were trapped in a small Afghan village with enemy fighters closing in from all sides. The sound of an explosion echoed through the village, close enough to rattle the windows of the house. Dust drifted down from the ceiling as the structure shook. "That was our way out," Rodriguez reported through the radio. "RPG took out the vehicle we had staged for extraction. We're on foot from here." Thompson looked at the unlikely group he was now responsible for, a wounded undercover soldier, her civilian father who was in shock, and his own team members who had signed up for a routine patrol, not a rescue mission that could determine the outcome of major military operations. "Chun, how long can she last without proper medical attention?" Chun evaluated Amira quickly. The field dressing was holding, but infection was a serious risk, and the stress of movement could reopen the wound. 6 hours, maybe 8 if we're lucky, and she takes it easy. "Taking it easy isn't an option," Thompson said grimly. The gunfire outside was getting more intense, and he could hear enemy voices shouting in Pashto, coordinating their assault. "We need to move now, fight our way to an LZ, and get this information to command before it's too late." Amira tried to stand on her own, swaying slightly, but maintaining her balance. "I can make it, Lieutenant. I didn't spend 8 months in this hellhole just to give up now." Khalil finally spoke, his voice heavy with confusion and hurt. "If you were an American soldier, why did you not tell me? Did you not trust your own father?" "Because I love you too much to put you in danger," Amira replied softly. "The less you knew, the safer you were. But now," she gestured weakly toward the sounds of battle outside. "Now we're all in danger." Thompson checked his weapon and prepared to move. "Rodriguez, Morrison, status report. We've got them held off for now, but they're bringing up heavier weapons. Looks like this was planned. They knew we were here." The pieces clicked into place for Thompson. The too quiet village, the convenient civilian with a wounded daughter, even the timing of their patrol route. This was a setup. They knew about your daughter's real identity, and they knew we'd come to help. Khalil's face went pale as understanding dawned. "The man who shot her. He asked many questions about American patrol routes. I thought he was just curious, but he was gathering intelligence for an ambush," Thompson finished. "They're using us to test their attack plans before the main operation." Chun slung her medical pack and prepared to help Amira move. "If this is all a setup, then our extraction point might be compromised too." "Probably is," Thompson agreed. "But we don't have any choice. We move, we fight, and we get this intel back to base before those attacks happen." As they prepared to leave the house, Amira grabbed her father's hand. "Baba, I know this is hard to understand, but everything I told you about wanting to help people, about teaching children, about making the world better, all of that was true. I just had a different way of doing it than you knew." Khalil squeezed her hand, his eyes still filled with confusion and hurt, but also with the fierce protective love of a father. "You're still my daughter. Whatever else you are, you're still my little girl." The moment of family connection was interrupted by an explosion that shook the entire house. Plaster rained down from the ceiling, and Chun could hear the distinct whistle of incoming mortars. "They're stepping up the attack," Thompson announced. "Time to go. Chun, you stay with our wounded soldier. I'll take point with Khalil. Rodriguez, Morrison, bounding overwatch as we move." As they prepared to step into what would certainly be intense combat, Chun found herself thinking about the layers of deception and truth they'd uncovered in just the last few minutes. A wounded civilian who was actually a soldier, a helpful father who had unknowingly aided the enemy, a routine patrol that was actually a carefully planned ambush. But beneath all the confusion and misdirection, certain things remained clear. They had a wounded American soldier to protect, critical intelligence to deliver, and a mission to complete. Everything else could be sorted out later, if they survived the next few hours. Thompson opened the door, carefully, weapon ready, and peered out at the village street that had been peaceful just minutes before. Now, it was a war zone, with smoke rising from several buildings, and the sharp crack of rifle fire echoing off the narrow walls. "Ready?" he asked the group behind him. Amira leaned heavily on Chun, but managed to nod. "Ready." Khalil clutched an old hunting rifle he'd retrieved from somewhere in the house. "For my daughter," he said simply. Chun checked her medical supplies one last time and helped Amira toward the door. "Let's get out of here." And with that, they stepped into the heat and chaos of a battle that would test everything they thought they knew about duty, loyalty, and the complex realities of war in a place where nothing was ever quite what it seemed. The narrow alleyway behind Khalil's house reeked of gunpowder and burning wood. Thompson pressed his back against the mud brick wall, weapon ready, as bullets whined overhead. The Taliban fighters had positioned themselves well, using the village's maze-like layout to create overlapping fields of fire that made movement extremely dangerous. "Rodriguez, I need eyes on our route to the extraction point." Thompson spoke quietly into his throat mic while supporting Amira's weight on his left side. The wounded soldier was doing her best to stay mobile, but Chun could see the pain etched in every line of her face. "Not good, LT," came Rodriguez's response from his overwatch position. "They've got the main street covered with at least 2 machine gun positions. Looks like they're herding us toward the marketplace." Chun checked Amira's dressing as they crouched in the temporary shelter of the alley. Blood was beginning to seep through again, which meant they needed to keep moving despite the tactical disadvantage. "The bleeding's starting again. We need to get her to proper medical facilities soon." Khalil clutched his ancient hunting rifle with white knuckles, his face a mask of determination mixed with bewildered fear. "There's another way," he said quietly. "Through the old irrigation tunnels. They run under most of the village. I used them as a boy." Thompson evaluated this new information quickly. Underground movement would provide cover from the enemy fire, but it also meant potential for ambush in confined spaces with limited escape routes. "How long since you've been in those tunnels?" "Maybe 20 years, Khalil admitted. "But I think I remember the way." Amira leaned against the wall, her breathing labored, but her mind still sharp. "The tunnels are risky, but staying above ground is suicide." The Taliban position their fighters based on standard American movement patterns. "They know how we operate. Because someone's been feeding them intelligence," Thompson said grimly. "How high up does this leak go?" "High enough to know our patrol routes, our communication frequencies, and our extraction protocols," Amira replied. "I was trying to identify the source when my cover got blown." Morrison's voice crackled through the radio. "Multiple contacts moving in from the north. Looks like they're trying to flank us. We need to move now." Thompson made his decision. "Khalil, show us these tunnels." "Chun, can she handle underground movement?" Chun looked at Amira, who nodded despite her obvious exhaustion. "I can make it, but if I slow you down, we leave no one behind." Thompson cut her off firmly. "That's not how we operate." Khalil led them to what appeared to be a simple drainage grate near the back of his house. The metal was corroded with age, but when he pulled on it, the grate came away to reveal a dark opening just large enough for a person to crawl through. "These were built during the Soviet occupation," Khalil explained as he prepared to descend first. "My father helped dig them. They connect most of the older houses to the irrigation system." The sound of approaching footsteps and shouted commands in Pashto made the decision for them. Thompson helped Chun lower Amira into the tunnel, then followed himself, with Morrison bringing up the rear after replacing the grate from below. The underground passage was cramped, forcing them to move in a low crouch through darkness broken only by the pale light from Thompson's tactical flashlight. The air was stale and humid, carrying the earthy smell of underground water mixed with decades of accumulated dust. "The main tunnel is about 50 meters ahead," Khalil whispered as he led them forward. "From there, we can reach the edge of the village." Chun stayed close to Amira, monitoring her condition in the confined space. The soldier's breathing was becoming more labored, and Chun could feel her trembling slightly, either from pain, blood loss, or the stress of their situation. "Talk to me about this intelligence leak," Thompson said quietly as they moved through the tunnel. "How did you first discover it?" Amira paused to rest against the tunnel wall. 3 months ago, I started noticing patterns. Taliban attacks that seemed to anticipate our responses perfectly. Ambushes set up exactly where our patrol routes would take us. It was too precise to be coincidence. "So you started investigating on your own?" "I had to. If I reported it through normal channels, and the leak was in the command structure, I'd be signing my own death warrant." Amira's voice carried the weight of someone who had been carrying a dangerous secret for too long. "I began documenting everything: patrol times, attack patterns, communication intercepts. The evidence was overwhelming." Chun checked her watch in the dim light. "How much time before those coordinated attacks?" "Less than 5 hours now," Amira replied. 3 forward operating bases hit simultaneously during shift change when defenses are most vulnerable. They have detailed plans of each base layout. The tunnel ahead opened into a larger chamber where several passages intersected. Khalil studied the options carefully, his brow furrowed with the effort of remembering routes he hadn't used in decades. "That way leads to the market area," he said, pointing left. "This one goes toward the hills where your helicopters sometimes land." Thompson considered their options. The marketplace would put them back in the middle of the Taliban positions, but the landing zone might be equally dangerous if the enemy had anticipated their extraction route. "Rodriguez, status report," he called softly into his radio. "They're searching house by house now. Found the entrance to your tunnel. Looks like they know about the underground routes too." Chun felt her stomach sink. "They're hurting us again." "Maybe," Thompson agreed. "Or maybe that's what they want us to think." "Amira, in your intelligence gathering, did you map any of these tunnel systems?" "Some. I documented several routes that the local resistance uses to move supplies." Amira closed her eyes, clearly struggling with pain and exhaustion. "There's an exit about 2 kilometers north of here that connects to a network of caves in the foothills. The Taliban know about it, but they don't patrol it regularly because it's hard to access." Khalil nodded slowly. "Yes, I know those caves. My grandfather used them to hide from the British many years ago. But the path is very difficult, especially for someone who is injured." Chun evaluated Amira's condition again. The soldier was holding up remarkably well considering her wound, but 2 kilometers of difficult terrain could push her past her limits. "I can give her something for the pain, but it might affect her alertness." "No drugs," Amira said firmly. "I need to stay sharp. Too many lives depend on getting this information out." Thompson admired her dedication, but he was also concerned about her judgment. Pain and blood loss could impair decision-making, potentially putting the entire team at risk. "Chun, medical assessment. Can she make it 2 kilometers on foot?" Chun was honest. "It's risky. The wound is stable for now, but the exertion could cause complications. And if we run into combat situations—" "I can make it," Amira insisted. "I've been through worse training than this." "Training isn't the same as being actually shot," Morrison pointed out pragmatically. As they debated their options, the sound of voices echoed through the tunnel behind them. The Taliban fighters had found their trail and were following them underground. "Decision time," Thompson announced. "We go for the caves. Khalil, lead the way. Chun, stay close to our wounded soldier. Morrison, you watch our 6. They moved quickly through the tunnels, following Khalil as he navigated by memory and instinct. The passages became narrower and more difficult as they progressed, clearly designed for water flow rather than human movement. Chin found herself struggling with her medical pack in a confined space, but she kept close to Amira, ready to provide assistance if needed. "Tell me about your father," Chun said quietly, trying to keep Amira talking and alert as they moved. "How long have you been living this double life?" 8 months of deployment, but I've been preparing for this kind of assignment for 3 years, Amira replied, her voice strained but steady. "Baba, doesn't know about my military service. As far as he knows, I work for an international aid organization that sends me to the city for training. That must have been difficult, lying to family. The hardest thing I've ever done, Amira admitted. Every day, seeing the pride in his eyes when I told him about teaching children, knowing that it was only part of the truth. But operational security meant everything. One slip could have compromised not just my mission, but the safety of everyone I was trying to protect. Behind them, Khalil moved with surprising agility for a man his age, his intimate knowledge of the village's hidden infrastructure proving invaluable. The exit is just ahead, he called back softly. But we must be very careful. It opens into a wadi that provides little cover. Thompson understood the tactical implications immediately. A wadi, a dry riverbed common in this region, would offer concealment from aerial observation, but would also create a natural choke point that could be easily defended by enemy forces. Rodriguez, can you get eyes on the northern wadi from your position? Negative, LT too far and too much terrain in between. But I've got bad news, they just brought up vehicles. Looks like they're setting up blocking positions on all the main routes out of the village. Chun checked her medical supplies as they approached the tunnel exit. She had enough to keep Amira stable for several more hours, but if they encountered serious combat, her options would be limited. How's the pain? She asked. Manageable, Amira replied, though Chun could see the lie in her tense posture and controlled breathing. I've had worse. When? Morrison asked, genuinely curious. Ranger training, 3rd week of desert phase. Dislocated shoulder during a night insertion, but the exercise couldn't stop. Had to complete a 40-mile movement with a full pack and a useless arm. Amira managed a weak smile. This is just a flesh wound compared to that. Thompson was impressed despite himself. The 75th Ranger Regiment was known for producing some of the toughest soldiers in the American military, and their training was notoriously brutal. If Amira had completed that program and then qualified for special operations, she was far more capable than her current condition might suggest. Khalil reached the tunnel exit and carefully pushed aside a metal cover that had been disguised to look like debris. Late afternoon sunlight streamed into the passage, temporarily blinding them after the underground darkness. The wadi is clear, he whispered after scanning the area, but we must move quickly. Once we are in the open, we can be seen from the village. Thompson emerged first, weapon ready, scanning the rocky terrain around them. The wadi was about 10 feet deep and 30 feet wide, carved by centuries of flash floods during the brief rainy seasons. The walls provided good cover from ground-level observation, but anyone on the surrounding ridges would have a clear field of fire. Chun helped Amira climb out of the tunnel, noting that the soldiers' movements were becoming more labored. The blood loss and stress were beginning to take their toll, despite her determination to continue. How far to these caves? Thompson asked Khalil. Maybe 1 kilometer through the wadi, then a difficult climb up the hillside. The caves are hidden among the rocks, very hard to see unless you know where to look. 1 kilometer didn't sound like much, but Thompson knew that wounded soldiers moved much slower than healthy ones, and they would be exposed to enemy observation for most of the route. Mendez, we're moving to the secondary extraction point. Can you provide overwatch? Roger that. I'll leapfrog to new positions and try to keep eyes on your route. But be advised, enemy forces are mobilizing heavy. This is turning into a major operation. As they began moving through the wadi, Amira stumbled slightly, catching herself against the rocky wall. Chun immediately moved to her side, offering support. I'm fine, Amira insisted, but Chun could feel the tremor in her muscles and the dampness of sweat that had nothing to do with the desert heat. You're not fine, but you're doing amazingly well, Chun corrected gently. Just let me help when you need it. Thompson called for a brief halt to reassess their situation. They were maybe 200 meters from the tunnel exit, which meant they still had a long way to go through dangerous terrain. Amira, I need to know exactly what information you have about these planned attacks. If we don't make it out, can you give me enough details to radio ahead? Amira leaned against the wadi wall, gathering her strength. The main target is Forward Operating Base Chapman. They plan to hit it at 1900 hours during evening chow. They have detailed information about guard rotations, communication schedules, and the location of the ammunition depot. Thompson felt his blood run cold. Chapman housed over 300 soldiers, and an attack during mealtime could result in massive casualties. What about the other two targets? Combat Outpost Keating and Firebase Rhino. Same time, same tactics. Coordinated to prevent mutual support. Amira's voice was becoming more strained, but her information was precise and detailed. They have inside information about helicopter response times and reinforcement capabilities. Chun continued to monitor Amira's condition as they talked. The soldier's pulse was elevated, which could indicate either stress response or developing shock from blood loss. We need to keep moving. Staying stationary isn't helping her condition. As they resumed their movement through the wadi, Morrison brought up a tactical concern that had been bothering him. LT, this whole situation feels coordinated beyond just local Taliban capabilities. The timing, the intelligence they have, the way they've anticipated our responses, this feels like a major operation. Thompson had been thinking the same thing. Amira, in your investigation, did you find any indication of foreign support? Pakistani ISI, Iranian advisors, anyone with the sophistication to plan something this complex? The man who shot me mentioned something about northern friends providing new equipment and training, Amira replied, breathing heavily as they navigated the increasingly rocky terrain. I never confirmed it, but there have been rumors about Chechen fighters operating in this area. Chen understood the implications immediately. Chechen fighters had gained extensive experience in urban warfare during their conflicts with Russia, and their tactical knowledge had proven valuable to insurgent groups throughout the Middle East and Central Asia. That would explain the level of coordination, Thompson agreed. And it means this isn't just about local Taliban operations. This could be a test run for tactics they plan to use elsewhere. Khalil had been listening to this conversation with growing alarm. You're saying these men, they're not just local fighters? We're saying they're more dangerous and better organized than typical Taliban units, Thompson explained. Which means our situation is more serious than we initially thought. As they rounded a bend in the wadi, they encountered their first direct challenge. Ahead of them, the dry riverbed was crossed by a modern bridge carrying the main road between villages. To continue on their route, they would have to cross underneath it, but the bridge represented a perfect choke point for enemy forces. Hold up, Thompson signaled, studying the bridge through his rifle scope. The structure was empty at the moment, but crossing beneath it would put them in a kill zone with limited escape routes. Mendez, can you see the bridge from your position? Affirmative. Looks clear right now, but I got movement on the road leading to it. Vehicle convoy, maybe 3 or 4 trucks. Shouldn't check her watch again. We're running out of time for those coordinated attacks. Thompson was faced with another impossible decision. Rush the bridge crossing and risk walking into an ambush, or find an alternate route that could add precious time to their movement. Every minute they delayed increased the likelihood that hundreds of American soldiers would die in surprise attacks. What's the terrain like if we go around the bridge? He asked Khalil. Very difficult. We would have to climb out of the wadi and cross open ground for maybe 500 meters. Then climb down again on the other side. 500 meters of open ground would expose them to observation and fire from multiple directions. But the bridge crossing was an even more dangerous proposition. Amira made the decision for them. We go under the bridge. If there's an ambush, at least we'll know quickly. If we try to go around, we might be walking into a larger trap. Chen admired the wounded soldier's tactical thinking, even as she worried about her physical condition. Can you handle the stress of potential combat? I'll have to, Amira replied simply. Thompson checked his weapon and prepared to move. Morrison, you take point. I'll cover Amira and Khalil. Chun, stay in the middle where you can provide medical support if needed. As they approached the bridge, the shadows lengthened, providing better concealment, but also creating more places for enemies to hide. Thompson could feel his heart rate increase as they entered the danger zone beneath the concrete structure. The space under the bridge was littered with debris and trash, creating multiple hiding spots and obstacles. Morrison moved carefully, weapon ready, scanning every potential threat position. The sound of their movement echoed slightly off the concrete overhead, making stealth impossible. They were halfway across when the attack came. Muzzle flashes erupted from positions on both sides of the wadi, and bullets began ricocheting off the concrete bridge supports. Thompson immediately pushed Khalil and Amira toward the best available cover while returning fire at the enemy positions. Contact left and right, Morrison called out, taking position behind a concrete pillar. At least 6 shooters. Chun dragged her medical pack behind cover and checked on Amira, who had managed to draw her sidearm despite her wound. You should not be fighting in your condition. This is exactly the condition I should be fighting in, Amira replied, trying to locate targets through the chaos of the firefight. These are the people who have been killing my friends for months. The tactical situation was desperate. They were caught in a crossfire with limited cover and no easy escape route. Thompson's mind raced through options, but most of them ended with casualties they couldn't afford. Mendez, we need immediate support. On the way, LT. I can see muzzle flashes from your position. Give me 30 seconds. 30 seconds felt like an eternity under enemy fire. Thompson could see that the Taliban fighters were well-positioned and disciplined in their attack, further evidence of professional training. These weren't desperate farmers with old rifles. These were experienced combat veterans. The crack of Mendez's sniper rifle echoed across the valley, followed immediately by cessation of fire from one of the enemy positions. But the remaining attackers continued their assault, and Thompson could hear additional vehicles approaching on the road above. We need to move now, he shouted over the gunfire, before they bring up reinforcements. Chun grabbed her medical pack and prepared to move with Amira, who was struggling to maintain her balance while returning fire. Can you run? I can do whatever I have to do, Amira replied through gritted teeth. Thompson threw a smoke grenade to mask their movement, and the team began bounding toward the far side of the bridge. Morrison provided covering fire, while Thompson helped Amira move, with Chun staying close to provide medical support if needed. They made it to the other side of the bridge, but their troubles were far from over. The sound of approaching vehicles meant that the enemy was bringing up heavier weapons and more fighters. Their window for escape was rapidly closing. The caves are just ahead, Khalil called out as they climbed out of the wadi on the far side. But the path is very steep. Thompson looked at the rocky hillside ahead of them, then at Amira, who was clearly struggling with exhaustion and blood loss. Chun, honest assessment. Can she make that climb? Chun evaluated the slope, which looked more like a rock climbing challenge than a hiking trail. Not without help, and not quickly. Then, we make it work, Thompson decided, because failure isn't an option. As they began the difficult ascent toward the caves, with enemy forces in pursuit and time running out to prevent a major attack on American forces, Thompson realized that this mission had become about much more than rescuing a wounded soldier. It had become a race against time that could determine the fate of hundreds of lives and the course of the war in this critical region. The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains, painting the rocky landscape in shades of red and gold. It would have been beautiful under different circumstances, but right now it represented the approaching deadline for the Taliban's coordinated attacks, and the fading light meant their escape would become even more dangerous. Behind them, the sound of pursuit were growing closer. The rocky face of the Afghan hillside seemed almost vertical in the fading light. Thompson gripped Amira's arm as she struggled to find footing on the loose scree, her face pale with exhaustion and pain. Every few steps, small avalanches of stones would cascade down the slope, announcing their position to anyone listening below. 20 meters to the cave entrance, Khalil whispered, pointing toward what appeared to be nothing more than a shadow among the rocks. But this is the most difficult part of the climb. Chun, check her watch again. Less than 3 hours until the coordinated Taliban attacks would begin. They had to reach the caves, establish communications, and somehow get word to 3 different bases about the impending assault. The weight of hundreds of lives pressed down on her shoulders almost as heavily as her medical pack. I can hear vehicles on the road below. Morrison reported from his position, covering their rear. Looks like they're setting up a perimeter around the base of the hill. Thompson evaluated their tactical situation through his rifle scope. The enemy had them trapped on the hillside with limited escape routes, but the approaching darkness might actually work in their favor. Mendez, status report. I'm moving to support your position, but it's going to take time. The Taliban brought up some heavy weapons. They're not planning to let you out of this valley. Amira stumbled against Thompson, and he could feel her trembling from the effort of the climb. Despite her determination, the blood loss and physical stress were taking their toll. How much further can you go? As far as I have to, she replied automatically, but Chun could hear the strain in her voice. That's not a medical assessment, Chun said firmly. Be honest with us. We need to know what we're working with. Amira closed her eyes briefly, gathering her strength. I'm running on adrenaline and stubbornness right now. Once we reach the caves and I can rest for a few minutes, I'll be able to function long enough to get the intelligence out. But if we have to fight our way through more combat situations. She left the sentence unfinished. Khalil had reached the cave entrance and was carefully examining the opening. Someone has been here recently, he announced, his voice carrying concern. Fresh footprints, maybe 2 or 3 people. Thompson felt his stomach sink. If the caves were already occupied, their refuge could turn into a death trap. How recent? Hours, maybe less. Khalil studied the ground more carefully. They went in, but I do not see tracks coming out. Chun moved to support Amira as they approached the cave entrance. Could be Taliban scouts, or could be local resistance fighters using the caves for shelter. Only one way to find out, Thompson decided. He checked his weapon and activated his tactical flashlight. Morrison maintained security on our back trail. I'm going in first to clear the cave. The entrance was narrow, requiring him to squeeze through a gap between 2 large boulders. Inside, the cave opened into a larger chamber, and Thompson immediately noticed signs of recent occupation. Bedrolls, empty water bottles, and the cold remains of a small fire. But what caught his attention most were the papers scattered on the ground near the fire pit. As he examined them more closely, his blood ran cold. They were detailed maps of forward operating base Chapman, complete with guard post locations, patrol schedules, and structural vulnerabilities. Chun, get everyone in here now, he called out urgently. We've got a problem. The team quickly squeezed through the cave entrance, with Chun helping Amira negotiate the narrow opening. Once inside, Thompson showed them what he'd found. This is the intelligence headquarters for the planned attacks, he announced grimly. Which means the people who were here recently weren't random cave users. They were the operational planners. Amira examined the documents despite her exhaustion. These are copies of classified base layouts. This level of detail could only come from someone with high-level access to military planning databases. Chun spread out her medical supplies and began preparing a more comprehensive treatment for Amira's wound. In the relative safety of the cave, she could finally provide proper care. This proves what you suspected about intelligence leaks at the command level. It's worse than I suspected, Amira replied as Chun worked on cleaning and redressing her wound. These documents show operational details that are only available to battalion-level commanders and above. Thompson studied the cave more carefully, looking for any signs of recent activity. How many people were operating out of here? Khalil had been examining the area near the cave entrance. Based on the sleeping areas and cooking supplies, maybe 4 or 5 people. But they left in a hurry. Look, he pointed to scattered equipment and half-eaten food. Something made them leave quickly. Morrison's voice echoed from the cave entrance where he maintained security watch. Multiple vehicles moving up the access road. Looks like they're planning to assault the hillside on foot. The pieces started clicking together in Thompson's mind. They didn't abandon this cave by choice. Someone tipped them off that we were coming. Which means The same person providing intelligence about base security also knew about our patrol route and extraction plans Amira finished. We've been walking into carefully planned traps all day. Chun secured the new bandage and checked Amira's vital signs. The soldier's pulse was still elevated, but her color was improving with rest. The good news is that the wound is stable. The bad news is that you need at least 6 hours of rest to have any chance of making a full recovery. We don't have 6 hours, Thompson replied, studying the tactical maps scattered around the cave. These documents show that the attacks are scheduled to begin in less than 3 hours. Amira struggled to sit up straighter, her eyes focusing on the intelligence materials around them. Wait, look at this. She pointed to a series of radio frequencies written on one of the maps. These are current communication channels for all 3 target bases. Thompson examined the frequencies more closely. They're planning to monitor our communications during the attacks, which means they'll know about any defensive preparations we try to coordinate. Unless we can get word out through channels they don't know about, Chin suggested. Morrison called from the cave entrance. They're starting up the hill. At least a dozen fighters moving in tactical formation. These guys definitely have professional training. Thompson realized they were facing a nearly impossible situation. They had critical intelligence that could save hundreds of lives, but they were trapped in a cave with enemy forces closing in and no reliable way to communicate with friendly forces. Mendez, what's your status? He radioed. Still moving to support, but the bad guys have set up blocking positions on all the main routes. It's going to take time to work around them. Khalil had been studying the tactical situation from the cave entrance. There's another way out of these caves. A passage that connects to the old mine shafts on the far side of the hill. But it is very dangerous and very difficult. How dangerous? Thompson asked. The mines were abandoned during the Soviet War. Many tunnels collapsed, and there are places where the roof is not stable. One wrong step could bring down tons of rock. Chin looked at Amira, who was clearly struggling with fatigue and pain despite her determination. In her condition, navigating unstable mine shafts would be extremely risky. More risky than staying here to fight off a superior force. Amira asked pointedly. Thompson weighed their options quickly. Stay and fight with the odds heavily against them, or risk the mines and potentially lose everyone to a cave-in. Neither choice was good, but one offered at least a chance of getting the critical intelligence out. Show us this mine passage, he decided. Khalil led them deeper into the cave system, following passages that seemed to have been carved by centuries of water flow. The rock formations were beautiful in the light of their tactical flashlights, but Thompson was focused on the tactical implications of moving through such confined spaces. The mining tunnels begin just ahead, Khalil explained as they navigated a particularly narrow section. But once we enter them, there's no going back. The entrance can only be opened from this side. Chan helped Amira through the difficult terrain, noting that the soldiers' movements were becoming more labored. How long is the mine passage? Maybe 2 kilometers to reach the far side of the hill. But it is not straight path. Many turns, many places where tunnels branch off. Easy to become lost. Thompson understood the implications immediately. 2 kilometers through unstable tunnels, with a wounded soldier and an aging civilian, while enemy forces hunted them from behind. It was the kind of impossible mission that Special Operations Forces trained for, but hoped never to encounter. As they reached the entrance to the mining complex, Morrison reported more bad news. They've reached the cave entrance. I can hear them setting up outside. Sounds like they're preparing for either a direct assault or siege. The mine entrance was marked by rotting wooden timbers and rusted metal equipment left behind by Soviet-era mining operations. The air coming from the tunnels was stale and carried the musty smell of decades-old decay. Once we go in there, we're committed, Thompson announced. No extraction, no backup, no support. Just us and whatever we can carry. Chun double-checked her medical supplies, knowing that if Amira's condition deteriorated in the mines, there would be limited options for treatment. Are you sure you can handle this? Amira looked at the intelligence documents she'd been carrying since they left the cave. 300 soldiers are going to die if we don't get this information out. I can handle whatever I have to handle. Thompson activated his radio for what might be the last time before they enter the mines. Mendez, we're going underground through mine shafts. Lose communication for extended period. If you don't hear from us in 4 hours, assume we didn't make it, and find another way to warn the bases about the coordinated attacks. Roger that, LT. I'll keep the bad guys busy out here for as long as possible. Khalil entered the mine first, followed by Thompson and Amira, with Chun and Morrison bringing up the rear. The wooden support timbers creaked ominously as they passed, and loose rocks occasionally cascaded from the ceiling. Stay close together, Khalil warned. Some passages look stable, but are not. Follow exactly in my footsteps. The mine tunnels were a maze of branching passages, abandoned equipment, and unstable rock formations. Thompson's tactical flashlight revealed decades of mining activity. Rusted rail tracks, broken wooden carts, and tools left behind when the operation was abandoned. How do you know which way to go? Chun asked as they encountered their third branching passage. My uncle worked these mines before the Soviets came, Khalil explained. As a boy, I explored every tunnel. But that was 40 years ago. Some things have changed. As if to emphasize his point, they heard a distant rumbling sound from somewhere ahead in the tunnels. Dust drifted down from the ceiling, and the wooden support beams creaked alarmingly. The structure is not as stable as it once was, Khalil admitted. We must move carefully, but also quickly. Amira stumbled slightly, catching herself against the tunnel wall. Chun immediately moved to her side, offering support. The exertion is taking its toll. We need a rest for a few minutes. No time, Thompson replied, checking his watch. Less than 2 hours until those attacks begin. They continued through the labyrinthine tunnels, following Khalil's lead as he navigated by memory and instinct. The passages seemed to go on forever, branching and turning in ways that completely disoriented Thompson's sense of direction. Are you sure we're going the right way? Morrison asked after they'd been walking for what felt like hours. Khalil paused at another junction, studying the passages ahead with uncertainty. I think so, but some of these tunnels have been changed by rock falls. This passage should lead toward the main shaft, but he didn't finish the sentence, but Thompson could see the doubt in his eyes. They were lost in an unstable mine system, with enemy forces somewhere behind them and critical intelligence that needed to reach friendly forces before hundreds of soldiers died in coordinated attacks. Chun checked Amira's condition again. The soldier was maintaining her pace through sheer determination, but her face was gray with exhaustion and her breathing was becoming more labored. We need to rest, even if it's just for 5 minutes. Thompson made the difficult decision to halt their movement. 5 minutes. Chun, do what you can for her condition. Morrison, watch our back trail. Khalil, try to figure out exactly where we are. As they rested in the underground darkness, surrounded by the creaking of old wooden timbers and the occasional sound of falling rocks, Thompson realized that their situation had become about more than just completing a mission. They were fighting for survival in an environment that could kill them as easily as any enemy bullet. Amira leaned against the tunnel wall, her eyes closed, but her mind still focused on the mission. Lieutenant, if we don't make it out, you need to know the exact timing of the attacks. Chapman gets hit at 1900 hours during evening chow, Keating at the same time during the guard shift change. Firebase Rhino during their weekly supply delivery. Thompson memorized the details, knowing that this information might be the only thing standing between success and disaster for hundreds of American soldiers. What about the source of the intelligence leak? I never confirmed it, but my investigation pointed to someone in the brigade command structure, someone with access to operational planning for all 3 bases. Amira opened her eyes, meeting Thompson's gaze directly. The attack plans show too much detail to come from anyone lower in the chain of command. Chun finished her medical assessment of Amira's condition. She's stable for now, but We can't push much further without risking serious complications. How much further to the exit? Thompson asked Khalil. The older man studied the passages ahead, his face creased with concentration and worry. I think maybe 1 kilometer more. But there's a problem. He pointed toward one of the tunnels. That passage should lead to the main shaft, but I can hear water flowing. That means part of the mine has flooded since I was here last. Morrison understood the implications immediately. Flooded tunnels means we either find another route or we're trapped down here. There's another way, Khalil said slowly, but it requires climbing through a vertical shaft that may not be stable. Very dangerous, especially for someone who is injured. Thompson looked at Amira, who was clearly struggling with exhaustion and pain despite her determination. Can you handle a vertical climb? I'll have to, she replied simply. Chun gathered her medical supplies, knowing that once they started the vertical climb, her ability to provide assistance would be severely limited. If she falls or aggravates the wound during the climb, then we deal with that when it happens, Thompson decided. Right now, we focus on getting this intelligence out before those attacks begin. As they prepared to resume their movement through the mine tunnels, the sound of distant explosions echoed through the underground passages. The reverberations made dust fall from the ceiling and caused several of the support timbers to creak ominously. They're using explosives to clear our trail, Morrison observed grimly, which means they're definitely following us underground. Thompson checked his watch again. Less than 90 minutes until the coordinated attacks would begin. They were running out of time, trapped in an unstable mine system, with enemy forces closing in behind them. Move out, he ordered. We climb. As they headed toward the vertical shaft that represented their only chance of escape, Thompson realized that everything now depended on the courage of a wounded soldier who had been living a double life for months. An Afghan father who had discovered that his daughter was not who he thought she was, and a small team of Navy SEALs who had signed up for a routine patrol, but found themselves carrying the weight of preventing a major military disaster. The vertical climb ahead would test all of them beyond their limits, but it was their only chance to save the lives of hundreds of their fellow soldiers. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit continued to echo through the tunnels, a constant reminder that failure was not an option. The vertical shaft stretched upward into darkness, its walls lined with rotting wooden ladders and rusted metal brackets that had been installed decades ago by Soviet mining crews. Thompson shined his tactical flashlight upward, but the beam disappeared into blackness without revealing the top of the climb. Maybe 40 meters to the surface, Khalil estimated, studying the shaft with obvious concern. But many of the ladder rungs have rotted away. We will have to climb carefully. Chen examined Amira's condition one final time before they began the ascent. The soldier was exhausted and in obvious pain, but her eyes remained focused and determined. Can you grip with your left hand? The chest wound is on that side. I'll have to, Amira replied, testing her grip strength on one of the lower ladder rungs. How much time do we have left? Thompson checked his watch in the dim light. 73 minutes until the first attack. Even if we reach the surface immediately, we still have to establish communications and get word to 3 different bases. The sound of explosions echoed up through the mine tunnels behind them, closer now than before. The Taliban forces were systematically clearing their escape route, using whatever explosives they carried to collapse tunnels and eliminate hiding places. They're going to bring down this whole mine system, Morrison observed, studying the dust that continued to rain from the ceiling with each distant blast. Then we climb fast, Thompson decided. Khalil, you go first since you know the route. Amira, you're second, so we can assist if needed. Chun, stay close to provide medical support. Morrison, you, and I bring up the rear. Khalil began the ascent, testing each ladder rung carefully before putting his full weight on it. Several of the wooden rungs cracked or broke away completely, forcing him to find alternative handholds in the rock face of the shaft. This ladder is in worse condition than I remembered, he called down quietly. Some sections are completely missing. Amira started her climb, moving slowly but steadily despite her wound. Chun watched from below, ready to provide assistance if the soldier's strength gave out. Every few rungs, Amira would pause to rest. Her breathing labored from the exertion and pain. "Talk to me," Chun called softly. "How's the wound feeling?" "Like someone stabbed me in the chest," Amira replied with grim humor. "But the bleeding seems to have stopped." Thompson began his own climb, testing each rung and trying to identify the most stable route upward. The shaft was narrow enough that a fall would likely be fatal, and the rotting would make every handhold potentially dangerous. "Movement below," Morrison called out urgently from his position at the bottom of the shaft. "I can hear voices in the tunnel. They've found our trail." The team increased their pace despite the dangerous conditions. Thompson could hear Amira's breathing becoming more ragged as the climb took its toll, but she continued moving upward with determined persistence. "Khalil, how much further?" Thompson called softly. "Maybe 15 meters, but there's problem ahead. Large section of ladder is missing. We will have to climb the rock face." Chun looked up at Amira, who had paused on a narrow ledge about 10 meters above her. "Can you handle rock climbing with that wound?" "I'm about to find out," Amira replied, reaching for a handhold in the raw stone of the shaft wall. The sound from below were getting closer now. Thompson could hear voices speaking in Pashto, and the distinctive sound of metal equipment clanging against the shaft walls as the Taliban forces began their own ascent. "They're in the shaft," Morrison reported grimly. "Multiple climbers, moving fast." Thompson made a quick tactical decision. "Morrison, set up a defensive position at the first good ledge you can find. We need to slow them down." The next 10 minutes were a nightmare of desperate climbing while listening to gunfire echo up the shaft from below. Morrison had found a position where he could cover the lower sections of the climb, but the enemy forces had superior numbers and were gaining ground steadily. Khalil reached the top of the shaft first, emerging through a narrow opening that had been concealed by fallen rocks and desert vegetation. "The exit is clear," he called down, "but we must move quickly." Amira was struggling with the final section of the climb, where the missing ladder rungs forced her to rely entirely on handholds in the rough stone. Chun could see her trembling with exhaustion and pain as she fought to maintain her grip. "I'm coming up to help," Chun called, abandoning her own position to reach Amira's level. "No," Amira gasped. "Get the intelligence out. If I fall, the mission continues." Thompson reached Amira's position just as her strength began to give out. Without hesitation, he positioned himself below her and helped push her upward toward the shaft opening, where Khalil waited to pull her to safety. "Morrison, time to go," Thompson shouted down the shaft. Morrison fired a final burst down the shaft to discourage pursuit, then began his own rapid ascent. The Taliban voices below were getting closer, and Thompson could see the beams of their flashlights beginning to illuminate the lower reaches of the climbing area. Chun reached the surface next, followed by Thompson, with Morrison bringing up the rear just as the first enemy bullets began ricocheting off the walls of the shaft behind them. They emerged into the cool night air of the Afghan mountains, gasping with exhaustion and relief. But their location was completely unfamiliar, a rocky plateau surrounded by peaks that Thompson didn't recognize from their mission briefing maps. "Where exactly are we?" Thompson asked Khalil as he helped Amira find a place to rest among the rocks. "Maybe 10 kilometers north of the village," Khalil replied, studying the landscape in the moonlight. "But I'm not certain of exact location." Chun immediately began treating Amira's wound, which had reopened during the climb. Blood was seeping through the bandage again, and the soldier's face was gray with exhaustion. "She needs proper medical attention soon." The climbing aggravated everything. Thompson activated his radio, hoping to re-establish communication with friendly forces. Any station, this is Bravo Team 6, emergency traffic." Static answered him. They were too far from base to reach their normal communication networks, and the mountainous terrain was blocking their signals. "Try the emergency frequency," Amira suggested weakly. "Every base monitors the emergency channels." Thompson switched frequencies and tried again. Mayday, Mayday. This is Bravo Team 6 with critical intelligence about imminent attacks on forward operating bases Chapman, Keating, and Firebase Rhino. Time, critical information. Need immediate relay to base commanders. This time, a scratchy voice answered through the static. Bravo Team 6, this is Overwatch 7. We copy your emergency transmission. What is your location and status? Unknown location. Approximately 10 kilometers north of grid reference. Thompson realized he didn't know their exact coordinates. Overwatch 7. We have intelligence about coordinated Taliban attacks, scheduled to begin in less than 1 hour. All 3 bases are targeted simultaneously. Roger, Bravo 6. Relay your intelligence. Thompson quickly transmitted everything Amira had discovered. The attack timing, the detailed base plans the Taliban possessed, the evidence of high-level intelligence leaks, and the coordination with foreign fighters that suggested this was more than a local operation. Overwatch 7 copies all. We are relaying this information to base commanders immediately. What is your extraction status? Thompson looked around at their group, a wounded undercover soldier who had just blown 8 months of deep cover work, an aging Afghan civilian who had discovered his daughter was living a double life, and his own team members who were exhausted from a day of constant combat. Overwatch 7, we have 1 urgent medical evacuation required, and request immediate extraction from unknown location north of original patrol area. Roger that. We're vectoring search and rescue assets to your area. Can you provide any landmarks for location identification? Khalil studied the surrounding terrain carefully. There, he pointed to a distinctive rock formation that stood silhouetted against the night sky. That peak, it looks like a sleeping camel. Local people call it Camel's Rest. Thompson relayed the landmark information and received confirmation that rescue helicopters were being dispatched to their location. But the estimated arrival time was still 90 minutes away. Chun continued working on Amira's wound while monitoring her vital signs. Blood pressure is dropping. She's going into shock from blood loss.